Hello, welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin. Today, I'm joined by Jacco van der Kooij, who is the founder at Winning by Design. So we use Winning by Design principles here at Testimonial Hero. We have for a long time, so I was excited for this one. We discuss the concept of a revenue factory and how we're past that old grow at all cost strategy that was around for so many years in B2B tech. And we also walk through how to conduct a strong discovery call and how to effectively diagnose customer problems. Hey, Jacco, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me, Dustin.
Yeah, thanks for being here. It's going to be a fun one. I think we use a lot of Winning by Design principles here. So it's cool to go to the source and ask some questions. But before we went on air, and something you've talked about on LinkedIn a lot lately is the concept of a revenue factory. And I want to unpack that first. So like for people who don't know what that is, what is a revenue factory?
Yeah. A revenue factory, once a company surpasses or exceeds $10 million in ARR, it essentially starts to operate really much like a factory in which things are scalable and so on and so forth. And if you look at it, a factory really has three goals: increase production, lower the cost of production, and ensure a high level of quality of the product. And if you think about it, that's the exact same goal that a growth engine has at a startup and a scale up, whether it's a 10 million, 100 million, or a billion or 10 billion. And what we find is that GTM motions, such as an enterprise sale or a PLG motion, they actually operate really very much like production lines. So that concept allows us to start mapping processes and procedures along a factory mindset.
Nice. That's a good explanation. I think the interesting thing there is prior to 2021, probably output seemed to be the focus, right? Like, how do I grow? How do I get as much output? What can I do? Now it's a bit different out there, right? We're all living in a different world now. So curious how that has changed and how you think people need to adapt to. It's not a grow at all costs mindset really anymore.
Yeah. So the growth at all costs, if you think of it, again, if I keep it in a factory analogy here, it assumes that there's always an unlimited amount of inputs.
Yeah.
And those inputs in the factory, right? There's always something. It's a gigantic green field, which in the early 2010s was absolutely the case. And in the middle of the 2010s, 2015, 16, many SaaS companies started to sell to other SaaS companies. And since that group was growing from like early 2012, where you had about 1,000 SaaS companies, by the end of around 2020, 21, we're talking about 35,000 companies. So it became a self-selling engine, right? If you were selling to other SaaS companies and 35,000 companies come and start buying your product. And so you'll see that happened a lot. At the end of 2021, as we now know, often named the SaaS crash, that crash occurred and that caused the end of the growth at any and all cost. That means that companies no longer have an unlimited amount of inputs and have to learn to either build new markets where there are new inputs, increase efficiency, and so on and so forth. But the inputs are gone. The unlimited amount of inputs are gone.
Yeah, I think and most people have referred to it as like the era of efficiency, or a lot of people are talking about that. And I think most people view that as cost savings more than anything else. And I think it's a lot more than that, right? It's not just trim all the costs and go buy bare bones as much as you can. A lot of it is more process framework driven. So in your mind then, A, this is probably a dumb question, but how important are the frameworks? I know you're going to say very. And B, like what frameworks need to be put in place to actually operate efficiently?
Okay, so think about the following. If I think about a production line, and again, using that factory analogy, I can do two things. I can improve the amount of inputs, in other words, from 100 leads a month to 200 leads a month, or I can improve the efficiency. In other words, the throughput performance. Now, the throughput performance, I can improve in three ways. I can make sure it's the right process, eliminate steps from the process. In other words, it may go faster. I may apply systems like technology, AI, for example, or I may, if there's human interaction, improve the skill level. Right? Those are three ways. Now, what we see is that AI is expected to play the same role to GTM, go-to-market motions, that manufacturing lines and robots had, right? The role of robots and the role of AI is very similar. One was to manufacturing and the other one is to GTM. And in particular, if you think about AI is built on LLM, of which the second L stands for language. And language is essentially the era of production that we create in GTM. We communicate with other buyers through language in written, video, whatever it is, right? And so you'll see the analogy there This is why you call it that's why people may call it the era of efficiency, but it's a lot more than that, right? The era of efficiency is effective, but you still need inputs. You can't get away from that. And so I like to think of it more, not as I like to think of it as that we're coming from the era of always more to do better, get better leads, execute better, get better customers, help the customers a little bit better. So if you do things better, that is more for me the mindset. I know it doesn't sound as sexy as the era of improvement, but I think that like we are going from the era of do more to the era of do better.
Yeah, and I think something you mentioned and hinted at there was like diversifying the channels, industries, etc., and expanding that way, which is often there's only so much juice you can squeeze from efficiency in a particular market, right? Eventually, I think you're going to hit that point where no more inputs, you're doing as better as you can, I guess would be the way to put it. How do you think through that? Say you've hit that point as a CEO, you realize I need a new stream or a new production line here. Then what do you do?
Yeah. So what you always need to understand is like most of us in this case, when we think of growth, we think of it as the perception of I need more revenue. But revenue is an output. Revenue is not, you don't look for revenue. It's not like there's revenue laying on the floor that you pick up. And revenue is a conversion of impact. An impact, if a customer gets what they want out of your product, whether that be a Netflix, whether that be an Uber, a Tesla car, or the software product that they buy from you, whenever a customer buys something from you and they get out of that what they want, they will come back for more. This is what we refer to as recurring revenue is the result of recurring impact. An example I provide often is that of the Disney Channel, which we recently unsubscribed from. As our kids left our house, I no longer am as infatuated with Disney. Is it a fantastic channel? Absolutely. Fantastic quality of content? Absolutely. So why do I unsubscribe? Because my kids no longer watch it, there's no longer an impact. Therefore, I unsubscribe. Nothing to do with the product, the way they sold it. Simply, recurring impact is no longer there, and therefore, Netflix still gets my recurring revenue, but Disney no longer gets. In other words, recurring revenue is an output. That means that if I want to build a business and where I want to determine where new markets are at, I need to determine which other markets can achieve the impact out of the product that I'm selling, not which other markets will help me with revenue, which other markets will get the impact out of my product. Often that is referred to as an ICP or a target market, but in there's a person that makes that. So that's number one. Number one is recurring revenue is the result of recurring impact. Number two, when you want to grow a market, you need to make sure that you identify markets that have new impact. And number three, you need to realize that your solution is bought, not sold. And what I mean is you can uncover a market that there's an opportunity, but you can't create it, right? And so you got to identify which markets are there that that need this impact. They simply don't know about us just yet.
So that's a great way to explain it. So how would you think through that? Is it as simple as focusing on the problems you solve and what markets might have that problem? Or is there another step that you would take there?
It comes down to talking to your customers. You want to make sure that you talk to your customers, you learn from your existing customers what impact they get out of it. And if you think about it, most of the journey of a growth company, a company in hypergrowth, is all centered. The center of gravity often feels like it's around acquisition of new deals. And what I'm saying is, hey, maybe the center of gravity is where the customer achieves impact and when they start recurring revenue and expanding. Because if I know which customers buy and why they buy and how they buy, I can design everything upstream from that. I can design that in order to meet that. That is a very different mindset. Now, mind you, and I put the marker here at $10 million. At sub $10 million, you first got to create something, the chicken and the egg problem. So you first got to get to $7, $8, $9, $10 million before you get into this factory mindset mode and that you start growing the business. And that's that first 10 million, that is often like do whatever is needed to get there.
Yeah. And then I think that's probably why some companies maybe end up a little not efficient because they're scrambling, chasing the chickens before they hatch, trying to do as much as they can before. So we talked about diversifying revenue streams. We talked about also efficiency. A big part of efficiency, I'm going to focus on the new acquisition side. Then I want to talk retention and subscription for sure. But on the new business side, there's different levers you can pull, but win rate is king there, right? Like you can cram all the leads you want. If they don't progress down the funnel, none of it matters. So I'm curious, as a seller, how, because a lot of our listeners are marketers, how can marketers better help sellers? Like what sales enablement can they provide that is actually impactful?
Okay. When you look at acquisition, what you find, there's different GTM motions. You have the no touch, the low touch, the medium touch, and so on and so forth. So no touch, many of us would gravitate towards a PLG-like motion, right? Product-led growth motion. The low touch, think of that as an inside sales rep, like somebody with some chat assistants, online chat robot, and so on. Medium touch, a sales development rep sets up a meeting for a seller. The seller then converts it. It's really an efficiency play. If we go at high touch, think of that as there's an enterprise rep that is selling manages 50 to 100 customers a year, and so on and so forth. And a dedicated touch, in which case we're thinking of, like I myself used to be at VeriSign. I played for a short while a role as the account executive for Disney. So I looked at all of Disney for all of VeriSign. But you have only one account, Disney. But Disney has many different ESPN, ABC, Disney Cruises, and so on and so forth. So it by itself is a huge account. In some cases, you can have 20 people working for you, just working on one account. Okay, 5 touches. No touch, low touch, medium touch, high touch, dedicated touch. Mm-hmm. Every time you move up a touch, you actually move up and you insert more human involvement, right? No touch, like it says, no human touch, low touch, inside sales rep. And every time you do that, Dustin, you increase the cost of acquisition by anywhere from 2 to 10x. Mm-hmm. Now, like every customer has a specific way how they want to buy. It's not like everybody wants that dedicated touch. If I upgrade my seat from on an airplane, I actually don't want human involvement. It's faster. I can see it myself. I pick the seat I want. It's faster. It's an example of sometimes no touch is way better. Mm-hmm. So customers then have a certain preference on how they want to buy. Like in case of the seats, I want to pick it. In case of an Uber, I don't want to talk to somebody. I want to do it on my phone. But when I buy a $100,000 software product that requires integration, I suddenly want to talk to someone to make sure that integration actually works, that there is actually something capable of that it works with my infrastructure. And so now suddenly I need to talk to a sales professional. That sales professional's role historically needs to be helping the customer to buy. Most of the time when the process is helping the company to sell, you're going to see that there's a friction that occurs. Mm-hmm. That friction is recognizable by most buyers. When they see that, they feel like they're being sold. The difference in that is, are you diagnosing the customer to help their problem, to help them solve their problem? Or are you diagnosing the customer to figure out what you can sell? That change in mindset is the difference between a professional who hits quota regularly and a salesperson who occasionally hits quota. Sometimes they can be good, but 9 out of 10 people that diagnose a solution for the customer will have a long-lasting career in sales across multiple solutions they represent. If you're a good sales, like if you're primarily a sales-focused person, you have a tendency to have an occasionally good career, only dependent on the quality of the product that you sell.
Yeah, and I'm curious, is that a lot of that can be driven by frameworks, of course, and like spice questions and all of that, but is part of that just inherent? Some people have that curiosity and are more naturally better at that and wanting to help? Or I'm just thinking more from like a hiring manager perspective, right? You can train people, but are some people just naturally going to nail that part more?
There is, in every job, there is a certain percentage, call it 10%, it doesn't matter what, but what makes a doctor, an engineer, and so on and so forth. And salespeople have that too. There's a certain amount that you have to have affinity for the job, that you have to feel like that you like doing it, and that you're meant to do that. Excuse me. What you find is that frameworks help you make sure that every time you do it, not everybody wants to be a Michael Jordan NBA level player, but not everybody can. Not everybody needs to be like that superstar level approach is not what every NBA team needs or every sports team needs. 80% of the sports team is just reliably deliverable performers. Same thing in a company. That 80% copies the best frameworks from the superstars. That framework is implemented in a process and then rolled out and for disciplined execution.
Yeah, that explains the scalable part, right? Like you can't clone Michael Jordan, for example. It's not possible. And I think So you mentioned people who, in other words, people who sell too hard rather than diagnose the problem struggle. And I find that's been highlighted more recently. And people just have more indecision, even for smaller deals. Like during the heyday, like you said, when everyone was buying everything, 20K deal, like who cares? So I'm just going to sign it. Whereas now people are like, am I going to get fired if I mess this up? And there's so much indecision. So how does that change how a seller has to approach things?
Okay, so I want to zoom in on the factory, right? I say, hey, I'm running a $20 million revenue business. I have 3 production lines, right? Like a PLG, let's call it an SMB, a mid-market, and an enterprise motion. I'm going to the enterprise motion. I'm honing in on the enterprise production line. The enterprise production line is very much driven not on process and skills, not process and technology. Like the SMB motion, higher volume, right? May have 1,000 wins a year, runs very much on process and execution via systems such as automated email processes and whatnot, right? Whether that is good or bad, it's part of the process nowadays. Enterprise is very much like high ACV sale is very much on process and skills. But, and this is very important, today, we often believe, because we come out of a greenfield mindset where there was always enough inputs, the efficiency was not in the form of disciplined execution. The efficiency was work as hard as you can for as early in the morning as you can to as late at day. But the volume now has gone down. And so now we need to do more with less. That requires disciplined execution. Execute the proven process, aka the actions, in the right order that they were designed to do, along the skills that you have been taught. This third part, process, is one, skills to execute is second, but the disciplined execution is what is the problem today that many organizations struggle with. In other words, their teams have the skills, have been trained, but they're not executing it in a disciplined manner.
And why do you think that is? Like, what's holding them back? Is it just they're so used to doing it one way or taking shortcuts, or like what is holding them back?
We live in a trickster environment in which, like when you go to Instagram, rather than having a career and learning how to photograph, they say, do your iPhone this, splash a piece of water, put your iPhone like that, and you have a beautiful picture. And it looks great, right? And in some cases, it works. That doesn't make you a photographer. Same thing that we have in sales. Just because there were tricks that we learned over the last years, reach somebody out on LinkedIn, doesn't make you a salesperson. A salesperson is disciplined execution of proven actions. Now, what you'll see when we deal with the superstars, it feels like they're winging it. They're not. They often are repeating a very known pattern, right? And a pattern of asking a little bit of questions, getting to the point first, making sure that meetings end on the action achieved, the agreed action item achieved. This is again and again the history. I'll ask you the following, right? The other day, I'm in a room full of executives, right? And I say like, how many executives, I asked a group of executives and asked them, how many minutes into a meeting with a seller do you know is going to be a good call, right? Professional experience and whatnot. How many minutes? What do you think they said? How many minutes does it take the average executive to know the quality of the meeting that they're in with?
I'd say within the first 5 for sure.
That's exactly the answer, the first 5. Okay, so the first 5 minutes. Then I asked the following. If you have a meeting with a professional executive, right? If a seller leaves a professional impression, on the next meeting, are you more or less likely to bring the right people in the room? What's the answer?
More likely for sure.
Okay. That means that I have fewer meetings needed to close a deal. That means the first 5 minutes of a call is super important. That requires discipline to execute. What you'll often see is that most amateur sellers are just think that social talk is really important and establishing it and talking about this and that. It is not the case. The most important thing is maybe 1 minute, get everybody in the room, that's fine. But in that second minute, you need to get started. The goal of the meeting is, I got you till what we call an ace. Appreciate you folks taking the time. I got you till the bottom of the hour. Does that still work? The goal of the meeting today is, are we all agreed to that goal? Okay, I have the following agenda prepared for you to get us there. Would you like to add anything? Blah, blah, blah. Whatever, it is a very structured approach. And it's not an approach that a seller, and this is the point of discipline, it's not an approach that a seller can do once when they're being tested, right? That's not the point. The point is, if you wake a person up, it's hard for them to do wrong. They always do it right. Always. Doesn't matter how it's a repetition. The muscle memory kicks in automatically. If you would wake them up at 2 a.m. at night on a Saturday night, and you would wake them up and say, okay, you got to start this meeting, they will still leave a 90% level quality meeting because they are falling back on their muscle memory.
Yeah, and I do wonder if like a lot of that is professionalism, like you said, and following the process. But I do wonder if some sellers, especially earlier in their career, have this misconception that selling is like fast talking, I need to sell them rather than I need to have a process and understand. Because in our mind, when we think of good sellers, we picture like that really, or a lot of people picture that loud, outgoing, flamboyant seller. Some of the best sellers I've had on my team have actually been pretty introverted and like very by the book, which seems counterintuitive.
That is correct. There are 3 different sales techniques. And those sales techniques can be like an introvert can deliver that, an extrovert, and so on. But essentially, it's the fundamental technique, right? Think of a great basketball player or any other great. You got people with great technique, and you got people who are flamboyant around that. They show up in like bright colored like clothing and stuff like that. We could correlate that the bright color, the clothing that they're wearing of their own clothing line equates to great sportsmanship. It's not, right? Like we can't mix both. So I'm going to go, what are the 3 specific techniques that are used in B2B? Number 1, we call transactional selling. In that case, you're able to represent your product really well. You command the message of your product proposal, and that gives you a great value pitch. You can say, my product does X, Y, and Z. Pitching is the key skill set in that.
Yep.
Okay. Number 2 technique, consultative. In consultative selling, we ask questions to diagnose the problem. A technique that you often hear is called spin selling, in which there's a sequence of asking questions to diagnose a customer's problems properly. The same way how a doctor has a series of questions to diagnose what is wrong with a human being. This is consultative selling. Consultative selling is often curious. And consultative selling historically has been the backbone of B2B. And then early on in 2012-13, Matt Dixon came out with a book called Challenger Selling. And it described that sometimes you need to provoke a customer. You need to say you're thinking about it differently. Provoking or challenging a customer comes from a field of expertise where you market so well that you can tell a customer when you know their situation very well that they're doing it the wrong way and that there's a better way. 3 techniques. Transaction, I pitch. Consultative, I ask questions. And provoke, I challenge the customer on their previous, what often is a misconception on what the market is at. Here's the point, Dustin. In SaaS selling, you don't need 1, you need all 3 in 5 minutes. I need to ask a few questions. I need to provoke my audience. And then I need to sell on that highly innovative feature that I have in my product. In 5 minutes, I need all these 3 techniques. That means that when you are listening to a seller, you may see a seller in a particular situation exhibit one particular of these techniques. But in the end, in B2B sales, in medium touch, high touch, and dedicated touch, you need to master all these 3 and compress them in 5 minutes.
Yeah, which I mean, to someone who's hearing this, maybe they're new in sales, they think that sounds impossible. How do I ever get to that point? I agree, they have to get there, but let's talk to that person for a quick second, and I think we can wrap here. I think it's a good way to end it. So someone who's trying to get better, they're a seller, they just heard, I have 5 minutes, I need to do these 3 things, and they think, oh, I haven't been doing that. I've not been doing well. What's the next step? Is it a company problem, a them problem? Like, how do you handle that?
First of all, you need to be contextually relevant for your customer. So, for example, you look something up on the internet. Let's say you want to sell something to me. What did you look up on the internet that you saw in my organization, Dustin, that you think is relevant to what you're selling? Say that you're selling a simple thing. You're selling an applicant tracking solution, which is a solution that helps you hire more people. Now, you saw something, Dustin, on my website or on my LinkedIn website or LinkedIn profile that told you that selling an applicant tracking system would be applicable. What did you see on my website, or what did you hear about my company that you thought, hey, they need my hiring solution?
Yeah, it could be they don't have one Currently, they're running just a general form that goes out instead. So you could probably ask around, how many applicants are you getting? How are you handling it? Dig into the pain a bit.
Okay, now imagine that you want to sell me an applicant tracking system, but I have 10 openings on my website. So the first thing is contextual awareness. And now, combined with what you said and what I said, I can say something like this. Dustin, I noticed on your website that you had 10 openings, but that you're still taking manual entry by sending you a PDF file. Did I get that correct? What I now have done is I've created contextual awareness. So if you listen to me doing that, do you think I'm cold calling you?
No, I think you did your research.
You did my research. Right. Now, you don't need a lot of research. You need to do you need to be contextual aware to what you're selling. If I say, oh, I noticed on your LinkedIn profile that you're the hiring manager at company XYZ. Yeah, okay. That is also contextual awareness, but a little bit less valuable. If I say I saw on your Instagram that you were this week and that you are a member of this and this society, which I'm also a member of, yeah, that's like cool later on, but this may be a little too soon. You're stalking me right now. This level of contextual awareness in the right spot, that is what it is about at first level, right? It shows you what my intent is, but it also shows you that I've done my research on your end. That is essentially what we call a situational question, of which I have done my homework. I noticed that you are hiring 10 people. Is that correct? That is a first skill. The second skill is, as you answer me, right? I'll ask you a few questions. Just give me a few random answers. Dustin, I saw on your website that you're hiring 10 people. Did I get that right?
Yep. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, may I ask, what are those, what positions? I saw they all engineering?
Most of them, front end and back end engineering.
And I noticed also that you asked your applicants to send in the PDF file.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell me more about that. How are you processing that?
Yeah. So right now the PDF file comes in and we have someone actually manually go through it and pick out the ones that might be a fit. And then they move on to the next level. So there's a screening process.
Oh my gosh. How many applicants do you get on the 10 jobs, give or take?
Each job gets probably 30 or 40.
Okay. So you get about 300 to 400 applicants submitted every month.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Now look, what I now done is I essentially ask what is a situation and pain question. The situation is you have 10. The situation is that you have 30 applicants per job. The combined is 300. The pain question is that you are manually processing PDF files, right? So that's in the back of my mind. Now understand what I now need to do as a sales professional. I cannot just pitch and say, oh my gosh, I got the right applicant tracking system for you. I cannot do that right away. I can do that in a second, but not right away. So the first thing I do is I establish what I call the summary. So if I got it right, Dustin, you have 10 recs open with on average 30 applicants per month for a total of about 300 applicants per month. You're asking the applicants to send in the PDF. So you are approximately reviewing 300 PDFs a month. Do I get that is that about right?
Yep. Yeah, that's all correct.
When I get that, you'll see we now have leveled.
Yeah.
Now I can say, okay, here's how we can help with our applicant tracking system. And now I can pitch. I can choose that. This is perfectly fine. And in some cases, people would say, oh, don't pitch. You can't pitch features. You know what? If you're the hiring manager, you have a pain. Like you might really enjoy being pitched right now. You might go, tell me what you got and how you can help me. That is now consultative questions followed by a transactional pitching. If you are a more complicated solution, such as, hey, you got Salesforce and you're looking to replace it, I would go deeper and I go like a little bit further. I go, okay, that's a platform. Who are you integrating with and what's on? Then it becomes more of a provocative sell. I'm going to say, hey, Salesforce is big, probably doesn't have. You as a veterinarian, you probably have you looked at blah, 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 IDEX, which is dedicated with. Now I'm slowly start to go deeper and I go for impact. That is when I start to provoke the customer and say, Salesforce is not the best solution for veterinarians. The best CRM for veterinarians is a company called IDEX. And that offers, and why is that? Because they integrate blood and urine samples straight into the CRM, which is something that's clear that like Salesforce can't do, right?
Yeah.
That I level up. That is how a sales professional uses that diagnostic technique to learn how to pitch and sell without making the customer feel awkward.
Yeah. And a lot of that is just building that trust, right? Like you said, it's the consultative side, but building the trust so that you level up to the same level. and they trust you and you're not just some sleazy sales guy trying to sell them something, because we've all got those cold calls as well.
Okay, it is a good point that you make, and it is generally accurate, but there's some inaccuracy there. And this is when often your listeners experience this. For example, you're a salesperson for Snowflake, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a data operations person, you probably have heard of Snowflake, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
so if a salesperson from Snowflake calls me, is it more or less likely that you accept the call?
Probably more likely, because I'm aware of them.
Okay. So is it the person that you trust or the brand that you trust?
The brand, yeah.
Got it. Now, that happens when a brand name, if somebody from Apple calls, you're going to more be likely to tell them, because you go, okay, that's odd, but you trust the brand. That brand, when you as a seller jump from a brand that is well known to a brand that is unknown, you suddenly understand what this trust factor is. And then this trust factor suddenly becomes an issue. Okay. So understand that sometimes sellers, if you're selling on behalf of Adobe, like a well-known company like Klaviyo, who just went public last year, there is built-in trust with the brand. But if that brand no longer is there, you find it as a salesperson suddenly much harder to sell because you do not have the personal credit. Now, if you think of a person like a Mark Casaglow or a Kevin Dorsey, right? These are established veterans in this industry. They actually have a really trusted personal brand. So if Mark reaches out to you, you'll pick up the phone call. Mark Casaglow is calling me, like, I want to talk to him. So you have the trust of the brand, the trust of the person, and the trust of the skill. The trust of the skill is the easiest to build. Pick up the phone, have a normal conversation, start the conversation properly, write an email, right? All that is the trust of the skill. 3 things: brand, skill, or company brand, skill, and personal brand.
Yeah, and then reps, like you said, getting the reps in so you can wake up at 2 a.m. So yeah, that was great. We, like I said, we run a bunch of the Winning by Design stuff. It's funny, we're actually trying to get more to a subscription model because we've been project-based for so long. So I could probably talk for hours about a whole bunch of stuff with you, but I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me. If our listeners want to learn more, connect with you, where should they go?
Okay, they can always look us up at winningbydesign.com. Obviously, the hot item right now, which we have been holding back for the past months, is the new book that just came out. It's called Revenue Architecture. You can find it on Amazon. And like that is that outlines many of these techniques that we just described today. Dustin, may I ask you, what is the one thing that you took away from you today that you go, okay, that was an eye-opener, I need to think that. What is the one thing you took away from this?
I think using the multiple levels during a single call within the first 5 minutes. Because I went through consultative training or selling training, man, I don't know, like 15 years ago. It was a while ago. And that's all it was just consultative. That's it. Just ask questions. Here's the questions you ask. And it never really tied it together. So that was my key takeaway, is just going down those different levels in a single call within 5 minutes, and how hard that is, really.
That's a fantastic takeaway. I hope your listeners all have a little bit of different takeaways. And looking forward to connect with them either on LinkedIn, where you can find me. Connect, let us know that you listen to this podcast. Dustin, it was a pleasure and a treat. Thank you for extending your audience to me today. And I'm looking forward to connect with them on social.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jacco. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. My key takeaway really was around those 3 main sales techniques of transactional, consultative, and provocative. So most salespeople are taught to be consultative, to ask questions and all of that. But Jacco's breakdown of having to use all 3 techniques in a matter of minutes to get your point across was really insightful. And it really highlights how difficult it is to sell nowadays unless you're following a process and doing it correctly really quickly at the start of the call. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please head on over to Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review. It really helps the podcast grow, and I appreciate it a lot. And as always, I'll be back Tuesday with a new episode.